spent a lot of time in my life thinking about, talking about, and writing about sex. This is not necessarily the path I had mapped out for myself growing up in Minnesota, and my parents would probably agree with me there. So not surprisingly, as I was growing up, sex was not on the tip of my tongue. Now, I grew up in the Midwest, which meant I was immersed in this wonderful reality known as Minnesota nice. And anyone that's ever visited the Midwest and come away thinking about how pleasant the experience was has experienced this regional delicacy. Now, after you left, you probably weren't aware of the passive aggressiveness or the talking behind your back that happened afterwards, but that's a story for another time. You see, this isn't a story about the power of nice. This is a story about the power of sex. Now, as we think about the power of sex, part of what we're thinking about, and for me, was the reality that I was not encouraged to ask that question in the first place. Now, I have no doubt that if I had asked my parents to sit me down and have the talk, they probably would have, and they would have done so happily, and probably done a better job than most. Perhaps you remember that talk with your own parents, yeah? You remember that look in their eyes as they searched for the words to describe to you what you were asking? Words that were never conveyed to them in any parenting manual, words that weren't passed down to them in the form of sage advice. Yeah? Are we thinking about it? Okay. Well, the reality is, I never asked that question, and my parents didn't have to answer it. Now, that doesn't mean that I wasn't exploring these ideas and thinking about them in a host of other ways. Our environment is saturated with messages about sexuality. And as we go throughout our lives, we spend a great deal of time thinking about it. We spend a great deal of time thinking about the power that is imbued within that reality of sexuality. But sexuality is about more than just the act of sex, right? It's about some very basic existential questions that we ask ourselves. Who am I? Am I good enough? Am I normal? What does sex feel like? What is love, actually? Perhaps you've asked these questions of yourself, because the power that lies within them is a reality based on the language that we use to talk about sexuality. So when we think about sex, it's not surprising then that we have a whole host of words to describe sexual acts, but we shy away from having complicated conversations about medically accurate language. We spend a lot of time talking about what we shouldn't do, but we don't necessarily spend time talking about what we should do. And as a result, our sexuality is hindered. We don't have the power to really convey the language that's important within sexuality. And it's that language that lies at the heart of why sexuality is so crucial. And so with that in mind, I'm hoping all of you will humor me for a moment, if you are able, and stand. So I want to take us through a little bit of a short exercise, a little stretching, vocal stretching, if you will. It's pretty simple. And on the count of 3, I would like each and every one of you at the top of your lungs to yell the word penis. Are you with me? Let's give it a try. 1, 2, 3. Penis! Wow, that was better than I get a lot of times. Now let's try it with the word vagina. 1, 2, 3. Vagina! All right, go ahead and sit down. A, thank you for humoring me. And B, thank you for helping me illustrate the first point that I'd like to discuss, language. The language of sexuality has a profound impact on so many different aspects of our lives. In fact, it was language that led me down this path in the first place. As a shy undergraduate student at the University of Minnesota, I had just started to come out of my fortress of sexual solitude, if you will, and I took my first human sexuality class. On the first day of class, the professor told us a story. She was a working mother and a sex-positive sexuality educator, and her daughter, who was now in kindergarten, had gone to daycare while she was teaching and working. Now, being the sexuality educator that she was, she taught her daughter how to use the proper vocabulary to talk about her body. Well, one day her daughter came home and said, "Mommy, my vagina hurts." She looked at her daughter with obvious trepidation and asked her to repeat, which her daughter did with the same discomfort as the first time. And after digging a little deeper, it came to light that the daycare provider's 8-year-old son had sexually molested her. So, this case went to court, and throughout the trial, the veracity of the claim was certainly verified. And at the end of the trial, the judge ultimately ended up finding both the father and the son not responsible for any criminal wrongdoing. His rationale? That because her daughter was able to accurately label the parts of her body, she was able to give consent. At that point, the true power of sexuality came crashing down on her. The language of sexuality influences our ideas, our politics, our education, our stereotypes. Indeed, we are taught how to perform every aspect of our sexuality. Just ask Judith Butler. Now, since we're on the topic, this is probably as good a time as any to talk a little bit about consent. We say the words yes and no dozens of times every day in response to a myriad of questions, and we don't think twice about it. So why then is it so difficult to have conversations about consent? Why is it so difficult to challenge this understanding and educate our young people about consent? I'll tell you why. It all comes back to sex. A lot of things do, really. And so with this power in mind, it's not surprising that we are unable to have even the most broad understanding of how to talk about sexuality. And if we can't talk about sexuality, then we certainly can't talk about consent. But the reality is, sexuality has an influence on a whole host of choices in our lives. Sexuality dictates who brings life into this world. Sexuality dictates how we experience pleasure. Sexuality dictates how we understand and interact with our bodies. Sexuality quite literally plays a role in determining how much time we spend on this pale blue dot. And so it is within that context that we talk not only about sexuality, but we talk about the choice and the ability to make those choices that is inherent in our understanding of sexuality. We are immersed on a daily basis with a whole host of gender stereotypes that dictate all kinds of different behavior in our lives. As Judith Butler so aptly states, we do not merely perform gender, but gender is in fact performative. And it's the power of that performance that plays a role in how decisions and actions are made for each and every one of us. If we look back throughout history, we know that sexuality has been at the heart of the rise and fall of civilizations. Even today, our sexually and politically charged air is only another recycling of a centuries-old conversation as we struggle to understand the power of sexuality and how to grapple with that power. Sometimes I feel like sexuality is the ultimate clash. Should I stay or should I go? It's fitting then that with all of this power, the way in which we see sexuality means we sometimes look at it as this proverbial orgasmic black hole, and we spend all of our time flirting around the event horizon. Now, understandably so, as we get closer to the sun, if you will, things get a little more dangerous. And therefore, it's not surprising that within the power of sexuality, we see a majority of violence that is perpetuated on various aspects of our society. It's fitting that as we look to the future and we look at the conversations that are taking place, we realize that our lawmakers continue to have conversations about pornography and other deviant acts, deeming them a public health crisis. But at the same time, we can't even pass the most basic gun control legislation. I guess the takeaway is the penis really is mightier than the sword. So as Michel Foucault so aptly states, power is everywhere, not because it embraces everything, but because it comes from everything. And sexuality is an extension of that power. When we look at the reality of how sexuality is communicated, I can think of no more appropriate venue for the culture wars that have emanated from our discussion of sexuality than that of the education that does or doesn't take place in our society. We have sunk billions of dollars into abstinence-only conversations about sexuality, while at the same time failing to acknowledge even the most basic, comprehensive discussions. We worry that we are going to rile up our youth and send them into a sexual frenzy, much like I no doubt did when I was asking all of you to say penis for the first time tonight. Now, I don't think any of you walked out of the room in order to control yourselves, so I think we're safe, right? I think we're okay. But the reality is, this is not a new conversation that we are having. Women have been expressing their concerns about conduct, about behavior, about harassment for centuries. What has changed is the volume of their voices, and hopefully our ability to listen to those voices and act accordingly to make change. Make no mistake, Me Too is not a new movement. And Me Too is more than simply a hashtag. It is more than simply a social movement. Because we know that sexual violence is real. We know that rape is real. We know that stalking is real. We know that domestic violence is real. We know that sex trafficking is real. And we know that cyberstalking is real. We're at a tipping point as a society. The brave voices of many individuals that have stepped out of the shadows to tell their story and to pick others up along the way are managing to do what all of the legislation and public policy for the last 100 years have been unable to do. The question then becomes, what are we going to do with this momentum? What are we going to do with this increased understanding of sexuality and the power that it holds? As we move forward, we have to think about sexuality not simply as an abstract concept, but as a concept that has significance for each and every one of us in our lives. Because in some way, shape, or form, we are all touched by the power of sexuality. And if we are going to move forward and reclaim the power of sexuality, then it means we have to reclaim the language. We have to reclaim our conversations about consent. We have to reclaim our choices, our identity, our education. Because we're not just fighting for the power of sexuality, but we're fighting for the very power of our identity and our being and the choices we make about how we express ourselves. And so my call to each of you is to reclaim the power of sexuality for good. Thank you.